Allan Beshore from the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. Allan Beshore has been a senior engineer with the Central Region for over 10 years. Allan has been involved in a variety of accident investigation, inspection, compliance, and pipeline integrity assurance activities. His primary focus has been on gas integrity programs and corrosion control. Allan transferred into the role of a Community Assistance and Technical Services Manager in 2011, and now enjoys interacting with a broad variety of pipeline safety stakeholders. Prior to joining the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, Allan was an investigator with the National Transportation Safety Board, a manager and engineer for natural gas transmission pipeline operators, and an inspector with the Missouri Public Service Commission. Allan has BS and MS degrees in chemical engineering from the Missouri University of Science and Technology, and is a registered professional engineer in the state of Missouri.
Thank you, Jennifer. And thank you all for coming tonight. So, as Jennifer mentioned, I'm with the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration. I'm going to have to figure out how to do there we go. I'm out of the Kansas City office. The Central Region handles this area. So there's my contact information. If you, they're going to post the slides afterwards, so if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to contact me. I just want to talk, I got a few slides on just the role of our agency. Our agency does both pipeline safety and hazardous materials safety. I'm going to talk about pipeline safety because that's the office that I'm in. So we regulate about 2.6 million miles of pipelines that support various aspects of the industry, electric generation, transportation systems, those kinds of things. The last comment there, interdependencies between pipelines and other services are not well understood because the economy is very, very complicated. So feeding one industry, that industry feeds another industry, so the direct role of pipeline transportation is a little bit unclear. Our mission at the agency is to protect people and the environment from the risks of transporting hazardous materials by pipeline. So what do we regulate? There's about 185,000 miles in the country of hazardous liquids pipelines operated by 400 plus entities. Over 300,000 miles of gas transmission pipelines with 950 some operators, and then gas gathering, and the bulk of it is gas distribution, which we issue regulations for that, but most of the enforcement activities and the inspection activities are done at the state level for all of the distribution systems in the country. So if you have natural gas distribution in your neighborhood, it's inspected and regulated by the Public Service Commission here in Michigan. So there's a picture of the pipeline system. That's the red is hazardous liquids. The blue is natural gas transmission pipelines. So as you can see, historically there was a lot of energy production in Kansas, Oklahoma, and Texas areas. So there's a lot of pipelines that originate in that part of the country and transport material then out to this area and others. So approximately 185,000 miles of hazardous liquids pipelines. 70% of that involves interstate commerce. I'll talk about alternate modes of transportation here in a minute that present different and higher risks. 93% of the U.S. transportation is fueled by oil. It accounts for 17% of the total freight in the transport in the United States at 2% of the total freight bill. So it's a very efficient process. By comparison, for hazardous liquids, there are alternatives. A truck can hold about 9,000 gallons of oil or refined products. That's a pretty big truck. Most of them are a little smaller. Barrels is the term we use more often. Rail cars about 33,000 gallons. So this topic of discussion tonight is primarily Line 5. As Jennifer mentioned, it's not the only pipeline in the area, but the capacity of Line 5 is published at 540,000 barrels per day. which equates to approximately close to 700 rail cars or over 2,500 tanker trucks. So to put into perspective the amount of product that is transported through the pipeline, those are numbers to kind of keep in mind. So if you look at the whole system over a 5-year window, this is the total amount of products transported by pipeline. So a barrel mile is taking a barrel of oil and moving it a mile. So it's a unit of measure that's used to compare different modes of transportation between trucks or rail or whatever. Oops, back there. So there were over 9 trillion barrel miles of crude oil transported in this 5-year window that I'm looking at, which equates to 11.8 billion miles by rail car or 43 billion tanker truck miles. So that's just the crude oil transported in 5 years. And also, this is refined products, and this is also highly volatile liquids, HVOs. Can you hear me when I turn and read my slides? I hear a difference. But I have to look at the slides or I don't know what I'm saying. Anyway, the numbers are kind of staggering because you've got close to 20 trillion barrel miles of various products that are being transported in that 5-year window. And so that slide, there's the alternatives at this point in time. We don't have the infrastructure to handle those other methods. And historically, rail didn't account for more than like 2 or 3% of the transportation. And you see a lot of news now that rail is being used a lot more often to ship crude oil, and it's got some issues, and we're seeing some of those issues. But historically, it hasn't transported a whole lot of the product. And trucking was really only used to take the gasoline from the terminal to your local gas station. That's the extent of what trucks have been used for in the past for the most part for transportation. The pipelines account for about 70%. And then the second largest mode of transportation for the oil and refined products is by barge. Maritime transportation was over 20%. I don't talk about that much because they don't do that much around this part of the country. So natural gas pipelines are a little different. About 25% of the energy consumed in the U.S. is transported as natural gas transported by pipeline. Approximately 7 million residential and commercial customers. There's significant growth underway in that business. Not many alternatives. This fella here in China has to go up and fill up his bag of gas, and that lasts 3 to 5 days for the family's heating and cooking needs. So fortunately, we have it can more convenient. It comes to our house. So, but there aren't a lot of alternatives for natural gas. This topic of this forum is really not related to natural gas so much, but there is some work being done on railroads. They're looking at some locomotives that are powered by liquefied natural gas, where they can carry a natural gas tanker or two behind the engine and that kind of thing. But it's moved intercontinentally across the oceans. But to move it around the U.S., it's primarily 100% by pipeline. So here in Michigan, we have some transmission pipeline mileage. These numbers are on our website. There's a little over 500 miles of pipeline for hazardous, highly volatile liquids is what that HVL stands for. That's propane, ethane, other products that evaporate very quickly and generally gaseous at ambient temperature. We're a little over 1,268 miles of crude oil pipeline, 1,400 plus miles of refined products, and 8,700 miles of natural gas transmission lines. So that's what's here in your state. And these numbers are on our website. You can look that information up if you're familiar. I'll have a link or a slide showing our website here in a minute. So where are we? I'm out of Kansas City. If you look, this is our central region. So we have 12 states, including Michigan, that are out of our Kansas City office. We have inspectors, 2 or 3 inspectors that live and work out of their homes outside the Kansas City office, but the bulk of us are there in the region office. We also have region offices in Houston, Atlanta, Denver, and Trenton, New Jersey. And our headquarters is in Washington, D.C. So we have base programs that we do as an agency. We analyze and trend data. We develop regulations, and we then inspect and enforce those regulations. We have a role with the emergency response in terms of reviewing spill plans that I'll talk about in a minute. We have integrity management programs. Our primary focus as an agency is keeping the product in the pipeline. So our focus is on that and less on emergency response. I'll talk about that a little bit more because other agencies have a far bigger role. We administer pipeline safety grants. I mentioned that, like in Michigan, that the Public Service Commission inspects and regulates the natural gas distribution systems in Michigan, and we, at the federal level, we have a program that pays for portions of that cost. And then we've issued, so we were highly involved in damage prevention, and we've got some fairly new regulations on public education requirements. We have a department, we do some research and development. We don't actually do the research and development, but we fund some research and development projects. So our strategic focus is safety, reduce the risk of harm to people due to the transportation of hazardous materials by pipeline. Reduce congestion. The pipeline system capacity loses capacity due to corrective action orders. Due to incidents. We issue corrective action orders and things like as a result of that. We're standardizing. We work in our region, we work a lot with the Canadian government because they have a counterpart. And for example, Enbridge operates in both countries. And so we do coordinate efforts with the Canadian government as well as the Mexican government, although their pipelines we don't in Central Region interact much with the Mexican government. Environmentally, we want to reduce the risk to the environment due to the transportation of hazardous liquids by pipeline. And then, as I mentioned, mitigate the consequences of a failure as part of our preparedness and response effort. So, in years past, we did our inspection program, and we would say, okay, we're going to go do inspections every 2 or 3 years, and that's kind of how we do things. And we're trying to move forward to where we're focusing our efforts on improving our data, improving our ability to analyze data so we can focus on risks. So we want to focus on pipeline companies that need our attention. We want to focus on pipeline systems that present a higher risk. So that's where we're spending our resources. So we're trying to kind of redesign our inspection processes so we're not so much hung up on doing an inspection every 2 years, just whether they need it or not. But we want to spend our time with the people that need our attention. And so we've got a lot of efforts underway that are kind of talked about on this slide. The inspection integration process, I'll mention that in years past we would come and do an inspection and look at operations and maintenance procedures, or look at integrity management, or look at some specific aspect of a company's operations. We still do those specialized focus inspections, but we're trying to get away from that stovepipe process to where we go in and do an inspection and then try and focus in our attention on weaknesses in the program to where we can and try and improve those things. I think I backed up again. Sorry about that. Okay, so just to kind of briefly touch on over the past years, the trend in serious accidents has been reducing. Serious accidents are defined as accidents where there was a fatality or some number of injuries. It's a subset of the reportable incidents. Unfortunately, we've seen an uptick here in the last couple of years on the hazardous liquid accident side, and we're not real sure why or what we maybe need to do differently to reverse that, or whether it's actually a trend or just a blip in the data. But the numbers have not been so good the last couple of years in that program. Some of the causes of accidents, the highest causes are corrosion, equipment failure. Excavation damage is one that we've focused a lot of attention on, and we've reduced those numbers. May not be on the right line. Let's see. Yeah, this green one here. So we've done some good there and reduced those numbers. You'll see excavation damage is a big high. This is a hazardous liquids pipelines only, transmission lines. So those are primarily located in rural areas, and there are some that are in urban areas and stuff, but for the most part, they're located out in more rural areas. So most of the excavation damage is a big issue is on the natural gas distribution systems that are in your neighborhoods where there's a lot of construction and excavation activity going on. So the numbers are a lot higher if you look at the causes for excavation damage, for example, in distribution systems, which is why we focus a lot of attention on it. These other items we address during our typical inspections, we always look at their corrosion programs and things like that to try and get a handle on those processes. So here in Michigan, we'll go back to Michigan. On a 3-year average, all pipeline systems, that includes the natural gas distribution and everything, there's an average the last 3 years from 2010 to 2012, no, 2011 to 2013, 7 significant incidents, 1 serious incident with 1 fatality, and that's an annual average. For the hazardous liquids pipelines, there were 2 significant incidents on average each year, an average of almost 800 barrels lost. We also have a number for the barrels spilled, but they recover a certain amount of that or some portion of that, so they'd also report the amount that was lost net. But in those hazardous liquids, there were no fatalities or injuries in that 3-year period here in Michigan. So 811, we always, support the effort here to call before you dig to prevent the excavation damage. What we don't do, I'll talk about a little bit, because we get a lot of inquiries from people that don't understand specifically what our role is. We don't authorize or approve pipelines. Our agency doesn't decide what product needs to be transported by pipeline from point A to point B. I mean, the Department of Transportation, the entity decides somebody has this product somewhere and they need to transport it. And our role is to make sure that can be transported safely. We don't oversee pipeline siting or routing, so you see a lot of discussion about new pipelines. People, the next item here, eminent domain, people get their property condemned for a new pipeline to cross it. We don't give them that authority. We don't have anything to do with that process. We don't monitor or track commodity shipments. We look at what products are in the pipeline because we have to look at the threats to the pipeline. So we understand what products are being transported, whether they're corrosive, those kinds of things, whether internal corrosion is a threat to the integrity of the pipeline. But we don't monitor what's in the pipeline at any given time. Most pipelines operate in batch form, so a refined products pipeline, for example, there'll be a batch of gasoline going through it, and then they'll switch and they'll start putting diesel fuel through it. They might even put highly volatile liquids, propane or ethane through it, and they're put in batches, and so they don't report to us or whatever what product is in the pipeline at any specific given time. We don't enforce right-of-way contract provisions or resolve disputes. So if you have a pipeline located on your property, they come out and they do some work or they do some excavation and they don't restore it back to the condition it was in. Unfortunately, we don't have any authority to correct that or to work that out. And we don't do long-term environmental remediation. There's a lot of people from state environmental agencies here, or the EPA, and the environmental agencies are the ones that are administering those processes to do the long-term remediation, if there is a spill. So what do we do? Well, we have regulations. We have two primary parts that apply to hazardous liquids pipelines. Part 195 is the transportation of hazardous liquids by pipeline, and that's the bulk of our regulatory requirements for liquid lines are in that part. We have another set of regulations for natural gas. They're separate. I'm not going to talk about those. And then Part 194 applies to response plans for onshore oil pipelines. So how do we spend our time? Well, we spend about 50% of our time doing inspections. We do failure investigations. The stakeholder outreach is what I'm charging this time to today. Construction oversight is also inspections. This teamwork, don't confuse that for team building. You know, we're not catching each other as we fall backwards or playing paintball. But we have teams that, for example, I'm the chair of the gas integrity management team. So we have representatives from each of our region offices that meet and talk about, changes to our program for gas integrity management, whether we need to update our question sets based on enforcement cases, what we need to focus on, what guidance we need to provide our inspectors. It's important for us to have some consistency between our regions on how we're approaching things. And so that's what that teamwork number is. And then we have a significant component of our time doing training. We currently have openings in Kansas City. If any of you want to go to USA Jobs and take a look. But we have had some reductions in force in the last couple of years where we had an early out retirement program. So we're getting a lot of new people into our office that we do spend a lot of time trying to train them. And so that's a pretty significant part of our time. So to talk a little bit about what is in Part 195, first of all, what's a hazardous liquids? So that part applies to these hazardous liquids, including refined petroleum products, gasoline, diesel, jet, natural gas condensate, crude oil, highly volatile liquids, ethane, propane. A couple of you may not really be familiar with anhydrous ammonia. There are a couple of pipelines that transport anhydrous ammonia. Not up here, but in the Midwest, there's a couple of pipelines. Carbon dioxide, there's some more pipelines being proposed for putting that carbon dioxide underground, getting rid of it. They're using it to enhance some recovery where they inject carbon dioxide to help produce new oil. And ethanol was a big thing, and we thought there'd be some pipelines coming around that were batching ethanol. That's kind of died down. There's some specific things that need to be aware of if you're going to build an ethanol pipeline. But we haven't had anybody, at least in our region that I'm aware of, that's actually built a line dedicated just to ethanol. So some of the things we have in our regulatory requirements, there's reporting requirements. If somebody does have a release on the hazardous liquids side, if it's over 5 gallons, they have to call and report it to a National Response Center, which is a number manned by the Coast Guard 24 hours a day. They also have to submit annual reports where they talk about the mileage they have in service, different commodities that they've transported. There's a lot of information in there on they report by decade, the year of installation on some of the pipes. They report by diameter, the different pipe sizes. There's some other specific things that they need to report on their annual reports. We have regulations that cover the design, the material selection, the construction process for new pipelines. So that we have regulatory requirements for that. For the pressure testing that they have to do upon completion of that construction, or if they want to revise their operating pressures later on, or for whatever, we have regulations on that. Our maximum operating pressure that they can establish is laid out in our regulatory requirements. We have requirements for maintaining their facilities. They have to inspect valves. They have to, lots of different aspects of maintenance. They have to do patrolling. So if you have a property that has a pipeline on it, they'll fly it every 2 or 3 weeks. Those kinds of things are covered in our maintenance requirements, how they can do repairs, some things like that. Requirements for managing corrosion and controlling corrosion so that they don't have integrity issues. Integrity management regulations, they have to do assessments periodically to assess the condition of their pipe. And then they have to take actions if they find issues. We have regulations covering how they have to qualify and train their employees to be able to do specific tasks that are safety related. We have public awareness requirements. One of the requirements is that they are required to establish and maintain liaison with emergency responders. And so we've looked at that for many years in our inspections to make sure that they're talking to the local responders and providing information on what they're transporting in the pipeline so that the communities can be prepared. And on damage prevention, as I mentioned, the 811 number. So as part of our routine process, the topic of discussion here tonight is Enbridge's Line 5, and you're probably aware they've had a recent project to increase the capacity of Line 5. So as part of that, they had to submit a notification to us. It's in our requirements that certain projects of a certain size or that involve a certain number of miles of pipeline construction need to be notified. So they provided us that notification in May of 2012. We met with them and got a briefing on what the project entailed. We performed a special inspection then upon completion of the project where we reviewed their hydrostatic testing records and things like that from the project. So, we were well aware of these projects that are going on and involved in the oversight of them. So we're talking specifically about the Straits of Mackinac. As part of our inspection process, they're required to inspect pipelines under commercial waterways periodically. We review those inspections. There was some mitigation activity. We reviewed that activity. We've reviewed the original construction records and things from when the crossings were installed. So we've taken a look at a lot of that information. And the integrity assessments that are done periodically is part of what we do on all our inspections. We review the integrity assessments to make sure that they're finding and fixing integrity threats that they need to address. So I'll refer, if you're interested, to there was an April, I have 25th, I was thinking it was the 29th, but anyway, that may be a typo. But in April of 2014, we responded to your senators had inquired about some specific information on Enbridge's Line 5, and so that letter's, you can review that if you're interested. It goes into it has some detail on when they did integrity assessments on specific pipelines at the crossings and things. It doesn't get into detail other than when those were done. So Part 194 I'll touch on about out of time here. So oil is a little different in Part 194. It's not the same as hazardous liquids. Now we're talking about oil. So natural gas isn't covered. Anything that volatilizes or is a vapor or atmospheric under ambient conditions is not included. So propane, ethane, they're not included in what's oil. Oops, I'm on that slide. Anhydrous ammonia is not petroleum, so it's not covered. Carbon dioxide and ethanol is the same way. So there's a little different definition of what's covered under Part 194 than what was covered under Part 195. So their facility response plans are outlined in the Part 194, what they have to have in those plans. The plans are submitted to us for review and approval. Those plans need to be resubmitted every 5 years or if there's a significant change in information. So again, the Enbridge Line 5 plan of interest to you all here is their Superior Region Response Zone Plan, which was submitted and reviewed and approved by our office. And the public version is posted if you go to our website and you go to the FOIA electronic reading room, you can review that plan. There are portions of it that are redacted. We have the obligation under the latest act that was signed in 2011 to consider restricting back information on the worst case discharge and where that's at and how it's calculated and things like that for security sensitive type information. And so you'll see that been redacted out of those plans. But the only other thing is personal phone numbers and stuff like that we have to take out. So what is our role in the event of an emergency? We're not an emergency response agency. We're not going to be conducting environmental monitoring. There's a lot of environmental responders, and hopefully you talked to some of them earlier before the meeting, that do these activities, that direct their remediation. But we have people that are pretty knowledgeable about pipelines and pipeline activities and pipeline maintenance and things like that that can be of value to the incident command system during the incident if disagreements arise and they need to ask us a little bit about pipeline-specific questions. And then, so what do? We investigate the cause of the release, and then we make efforts to verify the future integrity of the pipeline. We monitor repairs. We may require a reduction in operating pressure. We may require them to have a written restart plan, things like that before they start back up. We might issue a corrective action order that requires ongoing activities to do other additional inspections or make additional repairs, that kind of thing. That varies on a case-by-case basis based on what's happening with the accident. And then we apply those findings to either, we may find something that's applicable to an entire pipeline system that we need to address with that particular company-wide throughout their whole pipeline system, or it may be something that we need to consider rulemakings and things like that to apply those findings to the industry as a whole. So there's my contact information. My colleague Harold is also in the Kansas City office. Feel free to contact either of us if you have questions down the road. Thank you.